to Redefining Strategic Sourcing and Value in the Digital Era. I'm, of course, your host or moderator, if you prefer, John Hansen, and pleased that Zycus is allowing us to bring this most illuminating, I'm going to say it's illuminating discussion, I'm assuming it will be, on strategic sourcing and what you can expect or what you can look for. Now, before we get into the webinar, a couple of things I want to touch on in terms of housekeeping, we'll call it. First of all, tips for using WebEx. Much self-explanatory on the screen. The audio is provided through your computer, speakers only. The chat box, and I'm going to touch on this a little bit in a moment, is you can ask questions or raise any issues you might have with hearing us and listening and tuning in. And if you do encounter any technical problems whatsoever, please avail yourself of the email webcast@zycus.com. And the Zycus team will certainly be responsive in resolving the issues so you can get back into the game and partake with us. Now, one of the things I want to also touch on before I introduce our panelists, starting with Kate, is that this is very much an interactive session. In other words, we want you to be involved. So while there is a Q&A at the end of the webinar, quite frankly, we want you to use the chat room or the Q&A box section as we throughout this webinar so you can post questions, not only to me, but to the actual panelists themselves. This way, you get a chance to become part of the discussion, which I think is very important because this isn't a unilateral us talking at you. This is more of what I would call a collective or collaborative effort. Now, we also have 3 live polls that you'll be prompted to respond to in terms of questions that will kick off each section upon which we will be touching. So, again, I want to, encourage you to yourself of all these tools so that you can maximize your engagement and away from the next hour. Now, I want to start off by welcoming our first panelist, Kate Matassa. Kate, welcome. It's good to have you back. I think we may have a problem with Kate's phone there. I've got an X on it. Maybe Sanjeevna, if you can look at that. Oh, there she's back. Hi, Kate.
So thanks for having me. It's always nice to join our great panel discussions.
Well, it's always fun and informative and good for you. But you know what, Kate, if you could just take a minute, because I mean, I'm very familiar with getting to vested sourcing. If you could just take a minute to tell our audience, those who may not be familiar with you, a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a professor at the University of Tennessee, and I have the coolest job in the planet because I get to study very successful and sometimes not so successful, really strategic buyer-supplier relationships. And so work was originally funded by the United States Air Force and has led to 6 books on the topic, a couple of which you've mentioned. And so thanks for the plug on those.
Well, they're a great read, and certainly it's, again, great to have you here. Also joining us on our panel today is Critten Christian. Now, Christian, I have come to know you through Robert Hanfield, and he speaks very highly of you. And this is the first time we've been able to share these virtual airways together. And just welcome, and if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, and great to be here. So, let's see, from strategic sourcing background, and logistics and operations. And I'm primarily known as someone who tends to look at the flip side, or what I'm known for is the dark side of strategic sourcing. So how do you align goals? How do you ensure that a network performs the way it's supposed to? And not say for business towards cost cutting as opposed to, strategic relationships.
All right. Well, I want to touch on that dark side of strategic sourcing because you piqued my curiosity with that as we progress through the session this afternoon. But again, great to have you. Also joining us, I'm delighted to say, is Don Tora. Don, of course, is the CEO of Sourcing Industry Group. And Don, maybe take a few minutes to share a little bit about yourself, please.
Sure, and I have to debate with you, Kate. I have the coolest job in the world because I get to work with people like you and Zycus and John and everyone else and keep pushing it and elevating the sourcing industry. So my early days as a CPA, then at about 12-year stint, I founded a company called Denali Group, which was a sourcing consultancy. I will just sell that and then acquire SIG. So I took over Sourcing Industry Group. It will be 10 years ago, and it's the ride of a lifetime. And we just continue to evolve and develop, and we've added full certification with Kate's vested tools and techniques, embedded it as well. And we've also added the SIG Innovation Accelerator, working with early-stage companies to help accelerate their performance and ability to serve Fortune 500 companies where there are currently gaps.
You know, your background as CPA is kind of interesting because it's that bridge between finance and procurement, isn't it? That it gives you that added dimension. Happened. I remember about 10 years ago, I don't want to digress too much before I get to Phil, but I remember about 10, 15 years ago when I used to be on the lecture circuit and talking to people in the audience, I was amazed at how many people were coming into procurement from financial backgrounds or from a finance background. So it certainly is an interesting sort of crossover, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a great skill set to have, and we do teach a lot of financial acumen, actually in our certification program as well, because if you can't talk to the CFO and if you can't relate to the CFO, you have problems in sourcing. So I'm very passionate about teaching that side of it.
Well, here to join us. And of course, last but not least, Phil Dunn, welcome. Phil is the head of advisory services at IACCM. Phil, a little bit about
well, thank you. Just keep that again. My other role at IACCM is the CFO of IACCM because, like Dawn, I'm also an accountant. I joined PwC and trained up as an accountant and moved into consulting because I was looking for something. After I decided that being a fast jet pilot wasn't for me, I wanted something as exciting, so that's where the accountancy comes in. Since then, the consulting side, I've done buy side and sell side in large BPOs, ITOs, and I've also been there as an architect for managed business process outsourcing and technology outsourcing. So my role in IACCM basically is making members easy to do business with. That's what we're all around, making sure that their trade relationships deliver. Doing that through pushing the agenda around no-touch contracting, TC's benchmarking, simplification of contracts, organizational contracting, just about make sure that there's a good ethical relationship there and a transfer of value between theirs and the suppliers.
Great to have you with us again, Phil. And of course, myself, you know, I spend a lot of time. I'm the editor and lead writer for Procurement Insights blog, and you know, it's always a pleasure to be able to moderate these either live or via webinars. So again, thank you to Zycus for that. Just a quick time in terms of Zycus solutions, and at the end of the webinar, you'll have a direct link to hook up to learn more about the solution offering. Their source-to-pay solutions. They're a leader in 2013, 2015, and 2017. So again, I encourage you to spend a little time familiarizing yourself with this organization. Want to remind everyone as well, the poll results and a key discussion points will be shared later on in a tweet chat using the hashtag sourcing2018. We utilize this venue and vehicle simply because it gives us the opportunity to expand discussion beyond the parameters of the webinar's time frame and engage a lot of other people who may not have been able to join us. Now, let's focus on today's agenda. Let's get right to it. We're going to focus on three areas: major trends and challenges which are shaping strategic or sourcing strategy in the digital era. I know we talk about the digital era a great deal and digital transformation. We're going to be looking at strategic sourcing through this lens. We're also going to look at new value-driven sourcing models, or what's referred to as value-driven, and again, the impact of the new sourcing model on your organization. So those are the areas we're going to touch on. We're going to start on with the first poll, and I use this two sides of the same coin as an introduction to that poll. And Sanjeev, now I'll cue you. Strategic sourcing and purchasing are the same. Do you agree strongly, disagree, or not sure? And you know what? I'm going to start off. Chris, I'm going to go to you, and then Dawn, Kate, and then Phil. Christian, what instead of saying, what do you think the response is going to be, what do you think the response should be?
I'm going to put press E right now. that there is a definitely strategic sourcing and purchasing.
Okay. Yeah. Now, we'll ask you to elaborate on that in a minute. Don, do you agree with what Critten had to say?
I agree with Kristen.
So, in essence, you would be very surprised if it wasn't C across the board. Is that a safe thing to say, Kate?
Yes, I would absolutely agree. I would, however, add one caveat. While I'm in absolute agreement that it is not the same, I would actually say that strategic sourcing is an umbrella and purchasing would follow under that. So you have to think about the whole, and then you're going to execute the whole, and that's where purchasing would come in. So they're complementary, and I would say purchasing is under strategic sourcing. But if you had to set them side by side, they are absolutely different.
Okay. And Phil, are you going to be a dissenting voice?
No, unfortunately not. Or fortunately not. I'm going to. I see the purchasing as being one element of strategic sourcing, but strategic sourcing is so much wider. And it kind of frustrates me when people sort of use them interchangeably, strategic sourcing or commercial, and that interchangeably with procurement, because procurement is one element of it.
Okay, let me throw something out before I move this line. By the way, obviously, I don't know if we say you're great prognosticators, but certainly, based upon what you've just said, the audience agrees with you. Can I throw something out there? And this may be in addition onto what you were saying, Kate, is, there's definitions for purchasing, for procurement, for strategic sourcing, and all these elements, and we'll delve into it. But one of the things I remember many years ago, the CPO Agenda Roundtable had a discussion with executives. And the executives were saying, I would rather have one strategic thinker and 12 buyers. And I found that to be a powerful statement back there. And the reason why I introduce it now is that is there room in today's world with the advent of technology, with the intelligence that is available at our fingertips that maybe wasn't in the past? Is there room for just a common buyer anymore? Doesn't everyone have to have sort of a strategic role to play? Is there a way that this should be unified into a more collective view of the procurement function? Do you know what I'm saying? And I'll go back to you, Christian. Let's start with you. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're going to see a buyer disappear. Think about expediters, right? The material planning, all of these ERP programs, bill of materials, they were to eliminate all positions, basically finding out where stuff is and moving it through an internal channel. And at some point, when things aren't connecting correctly, call and that ability to call somebody up and get up on this situation is important. Basically, of course, you'd love to have all of your buyers be able to look at the big picture. At the same time, find those people that are able to add to a commodity space and plan sourcing strategy. Those types of people are becoming increasingly hard to find.
Is it safe to say, and Don, building on what Christian just said, is it safe to say then, and looking at this first screen, information is gathered and used for the best possible values in the marketplace. I mean, I equate that with any role you have in a procurement or purchasing function to get the best value. But what Chris is saying is it a progression that goes from purchasing to procurement to strategic sourcing, and that there is just some people out there who may not have the inclination or the aptitude to make that transformation? I mean, is it a progressive upward movement?
It certainly is from a perspective. It takes different talents to be able to go into, for strategic sourcing. However, I don't think it's a natural evolution for everybody, because I think there will always be a place for the basic transactional purchasing, things that are that will never be strategic to your organization, that are pretty much commoditized and available readily in the market, never a shortage, not a supply chain issue, nothing complicated. So I think there is still a place. I hope that you would automate or outsource anything that was transactional if you have people that have the other set. But I think everyone's going to make that progression. I think some people have already hit the top and never be good at strategic sourcing just because they could do purchasing.
I'm going to throw it out because that's an interesting point. Kate, one of the things that they talk about is the Internet of Things and the Internet of Things in human and the advent of technology. Remember, we're looking at this through a digital era, digital transformation lens. One of the big advocates of digital transformation is to say that it frees up people to become more strategic in their thinking. In other words, these more common positions or the basic buyer positions to which you talk about, the promise, and I'll use that famous quote, tweet from the Box president and founder who said, Uber is an example of the way in which the world should work or improve the way in which the world should work, not improving the way in which it does. I mean, ultimately, with the advent of technology, aren't basic buyers out of a job? I mean, and Phil, a few years ago, Tim Cummins said in a similar panel discussion, I believe you were there, Kate, is that 40% of all buyers, purchasing people will become redundant. Result of this. I mean, so is there, Kate, room to be anything but strategic sourcer? And that's where I talk about a change in unify our view. I mean, as technology advances, these transactional functions will become automated, won't they?
So one would hope that the companies would to the promise of automation. We tend to think about, and strategic sourcing as a broad encompassing aspect, and purchasing is just one part of that. So we use a framework we call sourcing business model theory, and on the left-hand side, if you drew a continuum, arrows from right to left on this continuum, on the left-hand side would be what we would call basic kind of suppliers. All you need is a PO, and you're absolutely right. That can be automated. Put that through a procurement software, and off you go. Go to, eBay, Amazon, business, whatever, service you've got to automate that. But at the high end of the sourcing continuum, you need to have more strategic relationships. Think about the value that is created from a buyer and a supplier actually co-creating and innovating on new product development, taking kinks out of things, working on solving problems. So we think as a continuum, and there's, you've got to build and order the stuff, but then you usually have to have more strategic relationships too. And some of those may be investment or co-investments. Now, I want to challenge your definition, right? What you said the definition of strategic sourcing was, because it, and I think you've switched the slide here now, you've speeded ahead, but really strategic sourcing is about your view of procurement, of things that you would buy in the marketplace. Strategic sourcing also encompasses how you look at things internally, right? Having a shared services organization to do a joint venture, choosing to create a cooperative environment, right? So those are all ways that you would actually strategically source as well. And so I think the definition here is from, Tech Target, and they're looking at it from data. So for their little world, that's probably a wonderful definition, but if you look at it from a broader business perspective, I think this is a myopic definition.
Is that most definitions of strategic sourcing in some tight link to decision making, and that means that sourcing is it has to be tightly connected to internal processes and internal decision making. And, market and even customer. It's also about where do we see the company in 10 years? Because our supply chain relationships, those strategic relationships, those are 5 to 10 year relationships.
I think because what we're seeing in some of these major IT outsourcing deals is the disaggregation of those, as what was previously seen as a support service, being technology, is now seen as mission critical for organizations. So they bring in the ownership elements of it and the interrogation of that. Because if strategic sourcing perspective, the buyer will build it's no longer a buy, it's a build your own. It's the ability to own that data, have that data, and interrogate that data to ensure that you've got a good service delivery platform. And so that actually has to be encompassed in strategic sourcing. Also, there's the buy or build and the internal capability, capacity, etc. But there's also a pure persuade. And focusing on the procurement aspect of it seems to suggest that there's always a transfer of money rather than other elements of value. And sometimes you can actually value out of a strategic relationship without the transfer of money in that. So strategic sourcing is much wider than that particular definition.
I'll look at this, and let's jump ahead to this chart, and I'll go back to Don. This was from 2017, Smart Procurement. It's showing the differences between traditional purchasing and strategic sourcing. So the first thing I would ask you right about that is it still valid? Is this a fair representation of traditional purchasing and strategic sourcing? And if it is, I'll throw in another crunch there. Again, if you look at all of the factors under traditional purchasing, how much that can be relieved or alleviated through the advent of the digital era and artificial intelligence and all of these other functions. I mean, you see, that's really, I'll let you answer that question. Still relevant, and how much of traditional purchasing and those functions can be alleviated by technological advancement?
Well, with what's in me, completely. But I agree that most of the traditional side can be eliminated through the digital applications that are current day and with the ones that are evolving. I would say a lot of people would still say that they're using traditional purchasing on things like the tail spend, and would now disagree that that's the thing to do. I think the tail needs to be addressed because of all of the risk that you have never even considered and not looking at those suppliers. So I would hope that through technology we will be looking at all of the spend. But yeah, I definitely agree with this chart for a number of places.
Okay, if that's the case, and technology can remove a lot of the traditional purchasing, and I'll go to you, Phil, and then to Christian, then to Kate on this. If traditional purchasing functions can be, again, I don't want to use the word eradicate, but certainly automated, does that explain why, for example, Tim would say that 40% of all purchasing people become redundant? I mean, and doesn't that, to a certain degree, Phil, force the buyers, the purchasers, the basic professionals out there doing what they do, doesn't that force them to become more strategic? Doesn't that force them into extending their role into a strategic sourcing role?
Capability.
Okay, interesting point. The capability. So let me go to you, Christian, and then to Kate. What capabilities that are needed for someone to be able to make that transition from traditional purchasing to strategic sourcing? Chris, start with you, and then go to you, Kate.
So I did some research on job postings. That's doing some analysis, and I looked at how complex the job descriptions were for and supply chain and industry professionals. For a VP or president of supply chain management, that job is about as complex as a surgeon's. So when you're thinking in those terms, how many people can get through medical school and go in and become a human being and have a human being survive? And then you're thinking, how many people are capable of managing $1 billion of spend with hundreds of suppliers and thousands of sub-tier suppliers, and still keeping their eye on the big picture? The challenge is that organizations face as they try to move or progress people through from a position up to a strategic sourcing position. The flip is, do you use the technology and the artificial intelligence to help you on the strategic side, and then build platforms to help buyers and purchasing people make decisions when they must be made?
The aptitude is the key, the ability and the knowledge to be able to leverage technology. Kate, and following on what Christian just said, and I moved to another slide from a Gemini white paper, where they said that, it's not just exploiting existing digital services. You've got to have new operating models, new governance structures, and creating new value-driven sourcing models. Within the context of the added slide here, what would you add to what Christian just said?
Yeah, I think he's right. The slide clearly highlights what we would see in our work at the University of Tennessee as well. You've got to move away from the transactional model, and these transactional models can be handled very well in the digital world. But as you take care of the buying and selling of the good, and the relationships become more strategic, performance-based agreements, public-private partnerships, vested deals, right? So vested outsourcing relationships. You need to understand the appropriate way to develop governance structures for those relationships. You need to bring in the soft skills of how you build and maintain trust in those relationships and don't get in this negative tit for tat, back and forth value degenerating philosophy. And we started out with a discussion with Don, and I forget who else was it, Phil, that was had a background in finance. You've got to be able to link value. It's really more than just the price. It absolutely is essential that you're looking at total cost of ownership, and sometimes not even total cost of ownership, but non-economic things that you may not even be able to quantify. What about you?
Okay, and Don, without putting a plug in for SIG, I mean, and it's an interesting element. Is that one of the reasons why organizations like yours are experiencing the growth you are? Is that people are starting to realize that we have to acquire these skills, or if not, we're going to choose another profession. But ultimately, everything's starting to shrink down. Going to what Christian had said, and what Phil alluded to, is you've got to get the right people in the profession now. Kelly Barner wrote in our book, Procurement at a Crossroads, saying purchasing was a place you'd send someone when you wanted to banish them and get rid of them. People in the procurement world, the purchasing world sort of fell into it. Is it safe to say that the maturation of the industry is finally beginning to happen? They're into it because it's a profession that is at times complex and complicated, but requires a good deal of investment to be able to deliver the results. I mean, is that a safe thing to say, Don?
Oh, absolutely. When I started, there was no chief procurement officer title. There was very little strategic sourcing in anyone's title, and you didn't have masters in supply chain programs that are so universally accepted. In fact, I'm working with a professor right now to create a curriculum that's going to be sourcing, not supply chain, just to focus an entire bachelor degree on sourcing now. So I think more that we can elevate and talk about, we're the cool kids. We are doing the coolest stuff in the world, and the slightest impact anywhere in the world can impact you. And think about it, and that's what, it's such a, when 9/11 happened, we had cargo ships that could be unloaded because of fear of terrorism. It upset all the supply chains in the United States. A terror attack in Mumbai, put the Dell call center out of service for hours and hours because they couldn't get the workers to the call center. Things like that, you just don't, finally understand we are all connected globally. Something can have a ripple effect around the world and impact supply chains and sourcing and availability of supply. That's really cool stuff. Tariffs, how it affects people. So we have so much into the company. We have insight into the redundancy, the stupidity right when it's happening. Versus the CFO, I'm a bean counter, but the CFO sets budgets and then sees the financial. We're a coach on the floor, coaching people and change things as the play is happening. And that's different than budgeting and reporting. So I think we have a huge strategic advantage, and the more we can get that message out there that really are the cool kids, this isn't the place you go when you can't do anything else any longer. It's no longer buying what people tell you. I think attracting more and more people to the profession.
Just to sum up this, first what it's saying is when we look at strategic sourcing, when we look at purchasing, procurement, it's not one of functionality or technology, but one of a mindset. It's a change in how we view what is needed to do the job. Is that a good way to conclude it, Phil?
Yeah, it is. When we look through, I'm in the UK, and one of the large corporate failures at the beginning of this year was Critten, which was a huge construction and facilities management company. It went down because of poor commercial strategy and poor contract management, and all within that was how it did its sourcing and how it did its procurement. It affects through the supply chain off being felt, and it's actually when you actually put the slide up which shows the share price and talk to commercial people, procurement people, contract management, that they are the most important people in the room, in the organisation. Start to dawn on them. They are. What we're seeing across the place is this increased professionalism. It is the fact there should be a career progression through. There should be a linkage. And what we do see, though, within organisations is that many of the elements that should come together in order to seamless end through from the commercial strategy, the business need, all the way through to the delivery of the service, it is in different areas. So procurement and sourcing is in one area, but operations has a big aspect in it. The strategy aspect has a key place to play in it. And it's about leveraging it up by making it more visible. It increases the desire for people to be in there because they are making those strategic decisions. How the organisation go forward. It is not just getting a catalogue out, choosing the filing cabinets or the desks for people in the office. It's much more important than that.
Now that we've got the foundation, and thank you for that, Phil, we've got the foundation of understanding what strategic sourcing is or what it encompasses, expanding the vision. Let's go on to our next poll. What value-driven sourcing involved? We've got about 45 seconds, a minute to respond. Is cost savings and higher efficiencies? Is it increased revenue? Is it an improvement in working capital or other? And we give our audience a chance to respond. Let me go to you, Kate. What do you think the answer will be, or what do you think it should be?
Your answer's not there. It's all of the above. So
thank you. I'm glad you said that.
I mean, we absolutely see strategic partnerships that can and do and are increasing revenue. They are driving working capital down. It is not about price or even total cost of it is all of the above. And then the tangibles that you can't even quantify.
Yeah, I'm wondering how many people had pressed the button already after listening to you, Kate, have changed their mind on it. Let me ask you this, Christian. If you look at this, because what we're saying is true, if you look at this, Christian, how many people do you think would look at the roles? I mean, does it reveal something about the mindset of the people who's responding if they say, well, we're cost savings and higher efficiencies, or less respond to improvement in working capital? I mean, what would that say about the mix of the audience based upon what answers they would give?
Like a big part is what is valued by the organization, right? So if how you define value is going to skew what your goal is important and valued. So if your core is all about getting the lowest cost, keeping inventory the lowest, getting in such a way that places all of the risk on the supplier, you're going to go on more towards A. When you start, as Donna said, about thinking outside the box, how do key supplier relationships allow us to increase revenue, marketing opportunities, into market, improving sell times? Then start getting into this idea of actually driving value. Think of it defense and offense. The things in the high efficiency, that's a very defensive position where you're really on maintaining margins. When you start thinking at the other side and thinking of market opportunities, revenue growth, improved working capital through improved cycle times, now you start to align function, source an organization with the strategic, financial, and marketing goals of the company.
All right, that's it, because it's interesting what you said, Christian, and of course, what you're mentioning. Don, going back, and then I'll go to you, Phil, because you have a great deal of interaction with with the professionals themselves through your organizations. 62 were, and I believe it's 62%, said that cost savings and higher efficiencies. To me, that would suggest a more traditional view of procurement. But said a lot of that is determined by the organizations with whom these individuals may work. Question to you, Don, is, do you deal with that where you make professionals who say, we know there's more to do, but because of our organizational sensibility or objective or view of procurement, they're not expanding or challenging us to go the way that we have to encompass all three of these things? I mean, how do you address that disconnect? I mean, do these professionals, are they ultimately going to be left in the cold if and when their organizations catch up and clue in to what's happening, and they have to become more broader in terms of the value they see procurement delivering? I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, a good point. I think it's actually more of we need to have a certain level or percentage of the VPs and CEOs trite out of the system. The ones that are still saying, what's that big buzz about the internet, and RPA is 10 years out, and AI is at least 10 years out, and it's never affect us, and we'll never go into robotics. We have an entire layer, I'd say about it, with this big, we spent $17 trillion in spend by that are members, but 1/3 of the heads of the procurement organizations or sourcing organizations need to retire. 1/3 are getting it, and they're the sales to do a proof of concept first, and the third are on fire and just want to go after everything. So I think the leadership has to evolve, and when you finally get, and I'm not saying it's an age thing, but I know people in their 70s that are just as brilliant as people in their 30s and just as excited about technology, but there's a level of folks that grew up with, having email, they would dictate their emails. They write their own now, but they never really wanted to get on board. So we have a certain percentage that trite out of the system, and they will either through retirement or they wait, and then we'll have a better chance for people who grew up with technology to embrace it. So, evolving.
Oh, I'm going to set this up with you and take it a step further because, Don, you mentioned something about this. I wrote a paper on the 4 cultural factors influencing digital transformation or digital reinvention. And a McKinsey study came out. It said that out of 1,687 incumbent companies worldwide, and when they were referring to incumbent companies, they were talking about well-established organizations, only 20% had a digital reinvention strategy. And of those amount, only 2% had a digital strategy for procurement or supply chain, speaking to what Don just said. So if you look at your membership and you look at the professionals there, I mean, what advice would you give to them? Should they, because it looks like if their organizations aren't changing from the top, it isn't going to filter down. They're being driven towards an obsolescence. Should professionals look to change companies? Like, what's your advice to a professional saying, I will do everything you're telling me, I believe everything you're saying, but Monday morning when I go back into my office, I don't have to deal with this old mindset of what purchasing and procurement is. I mean, what do you do with that, Phil?
Interesting one. That does set me up there. For the medicine in IACCM, what we encourage is for people to try stuff out and get small projects off the ground. I've got a member in the US government that who got a blockchain program off the ground and in weeks, and it reduced the the procurement time from something like 55 days to 5 days. That didn't come through from a directive from the top. That came through from driving out a bit of time and doing stuff. I was just reflecting on some of that, and there was a real smile because there's the permafrost layer is often what is the cause of that, and it's not necessarily right at the top of the organization. Most organizations are run by people that are by nature disruptors, and they actually are wanting to embrace many of this, but then it filters down to people that actually either don't get it or see that it's a bit too difficult, or actually, yes, they're the third that are ready to retire in the next years, and it'd be a bit difficult to undo that. So I think it's at the top of the organisation, but there is definitely an element within the organisation that does stop some of the new applications in there. And also, there's a mindset within there as well. So even the organisations that are actually at the top and within strategic sourcing functions are wanting a more collaborative, relational relationship with their suppliers. It gets blocked at the more practical level. So what do you do about that? Well, I think you just have to continue showing and showcasing what can be achieved. So we were with an oil major last week, and we were discussing with their drilling and their well ops sourcing organisations how they can work together to make some of the old oil fields more efficient. And in order to do that, that increases the revenue. These organisations have been at loggerheads. They'd previously been in a cost effectiveness, cost saving, higher efficiency mindset, and it just was not working. So looking at resetting that relationship, it moved us into an increased revenue agenda, because there was the desire to share innovation, to try things out, to get some of these old oil fields back up and efficient. So it's an industry thing. It's not just a tier thing. It's not just an age thing. There are some mindsets that do need to be shifted, and we just need to be able to promote those areas that good thinking and can be done in old style industries, oil and gas, and it can be done effectively.
So
it needs the big change programs. It needs small change programs.
So it has to be a change management program or a change in concept at the top, obviously, because if you look at those numbers, only 20% of the strategy. I mean, Don, we're at the tip of the iceberg here in terms of this understanding. Cost savings and higher efficiencies, of course, will always remain important. But a white paper pointed out increased revenues and improvement in working capitals are going to become key. So if we look at it and these pillars and to improve itself, I mean, what's to happen? You mentioned that the old dinosaurs, for lack of a better word, if I didn't misinterpret you, have to move on, either get out, move on, and make way for new headway. With regards to that, it's not going to affect the bottom line of these organizations who are slow to recognize this. Is that not going to ultimately be a trigger for it? And is that going to give them the time to respond effectively, to reshift their focus on this?
Well, to the success of a business, that I wouldn't say that just if they don't evolve quickly around three pillars that they're doomed by imagination. So I think it's going to make a differentiator between some who are more successful than others. And then, with the increased revenue side of it, I think that's relatively new for procurement people to wrap their heads around, except that if you go back, 15 years, maybe 20, when we first got phones on planes, that came from supplier innovation. That wasn't the airlines doing up phones. That was a supplier innovation, and didn't pitch it to the airline until it through a procurement person. So the procurement person actually the one who pushed the idea, because as you're talking to suppliers about these great ideas, able to produce a revenue-producing item. And now we've got movies and seats and all kinds of things. So I do think we have had that influence for a long time. Certain organizations listen to us. Certain organizations wouldn't. Certain professionals, one of the things I challenge every procurement person is to answer your phone. And they don't. They let everything go to voicemail because it might be a dreaded supplier trying to sell them something. And you don't know what you don't know, and you have to have these conversations. So I think we're evolving. I don't think I would rather take savings and call it equivalent revenue. And one of the things I'm trying to coach people to speak on, because it's so much easier to save on the buying that to sell $1 is not equal to saving $1. Saving $1 can be equal to $3 to $10 of sales. So I would like savings to be called equivalent revenue. But I also think, to be on a stool, cost, quality, and service. You can't push on all three equally unless you have a transformational breakthrough. So demand quality, I can demand quality, I can demand service levels, and that might impact my price. Or I can say price, but it might or my quality or my service level. I think that as we evolve, sometimes it's going to be we're going to increase the quality, we're going to increase the longevity of the things that we deploy and use in our industry. Sometimes we're going to have a total cost savings. So really think it's just more around the messaging and the direction I see it evolving to.
Okay, I'm going to go to Kate and then I'm going to go to Christian. I just want to mention that Charles from the audience responds saying, I posted a question, do you feel trapped as a procurement professional by your organization's view of procurement? Charles said, not at all. There are always opportunities to show value, especially to non-believers. So looking internally, that's a positive view of it. Let's look outside. And I'm going to go to you first with this about the leveraging supplier assets and capabilities and maximizing total value from suppliers. In 2014, November 2014 at the Virginia Forum, I remember sitting in on one of your sessions, and you told the story of your days at Microsoft. And correct me if I got any of this wrong, by talking about the wrong parameters of rewarding purchasing or procurement people for giving savings from suppliers at the expense of suppliers. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you look outside the organization, and originally Microsoft had that view, they changed. Questions now. What caused the effect of the organization to change its view on supplier relations and realizing that you had to stimulate a partnership or a collaboration with suppliers rather than just negotiate them down? And in essence, with that, is that possible to have that happen on a wider scale? Do you know what I'm saying, Kate?
So first, your story is absolutely right. I used to work for Microsoft in the early 90s and then left and worked for their one of their largest suppliers. And now I've tracked one of their really successful case studies, outsourcing deals with Microsoft and Accenture for One Finance. And I wouldn't say that, and I don't work at Microsoft anymore, so I can't speak for them. But what you see is there are enlightened individuals. They could be procurement, they could be in business. In the case of One Finance, actually the business side that said we need to work differently on this outsourcing deal. Right? The way we've always done outsourcing isn't going to work as well as if we truly create a partnership. And Tim McBride at the time was not the CP yet, but then later became the CPO, was on that team, also an enlightened individual. And it's individuals that choose to challenge the status quo. The famous Einstein quote, if you've always done the same thing, you're going to get the same results. And so I think that we have to understand that the world is more networked than it's ever been. We are outsourced. We are global. We have digital assets. Supplier making investments in suppliers are really big. We have them sit across the table from us and negotiate when they can be on the same side of the table, and we can use our power as a buyer plus the supplier's power together to our collective, what we call desired outcomes, right? So working together to do that. And what we see in our research, the deals that are the most successful are enlightened individuals, and not have to be someone at the top. It could be someone at the middle who has the courage to say, I want to pilot something. You don't have to change company policies on one supplier, one deal, if you get permission to do a pilot. And if that pilot is really successful, you might get permission to do another pilot, and over time, you change company policies. That's exactly what we're seeing is enlightened individuals. It doesn't matter where they are, challenge status quo, and ask permission to try something. Just try it. Is it going to hurt, right? So let's give it a chance.
Now, Christian, taking on what Kate just said in this next slide here, is it safe to say that organizations must learn how to partner within before they can learn how to partner externally?
Well, it depends. If you take Kate's view that if you have an individual that can navigate an internal system and navigate the supply market, one can make a difference. So trying to internally on the same page sometimes is more difficult than bringing a strategic supplier and getting a small group, one product or one commodity, to make a very big difference. In a perfect world, sure. Together, product teams, launch teams, design suppliers, and everyone is rowing in the same direction. That's sing kumbaya and hope it all works out. But for this part, I agree with Kate that it's a person to get through their 8 or 10 hours a day and then say, okay, I've managed to niche out an additional 2. What am I going to do with that?
Our program at the university, we try to say, change the world one deal at a time. Suddenly, some company has 5 vested deals, and they're like, wow, I should change my policy. This really works.
But a big part is, if we were to put a poll up there to, I guess, what do we have, 50 participants now, not that includes us. How many participants are purchasing people right now? Hair on fire. And you look at logistics costs going through the roof, transportation costs, tariffs, supply shortages, intellectual property concerns, and putting all these risk factors in play in a changing environment. And it's very difficult to cut out that time to make a transformation internally.
So is it safe to conclude, as we look here, and I've gone through a number of screenshots, and by the way, to the attendants, I just wanted to touch on those as examples. There are links, live links in the presentation that you'll be able to access. So when you get an on-demand version, you get an on-demand version of the PowerPoint as well to use these. And this is one example of collaboration. Is it safe to say, Christian, that the old adage that it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission when it comes to innovation within an organization is the way to go?
Well, and where you are and how secure you feel, right? But it's always been my motto. My entry in academia is get it and then make and explain it.
All right. In other words, as long as you can explain it, you're good. As long as the result is good. The ends justify the means.
Even though the result may not always work out well, but you show that you were on the right route, why you decided to make the decision that you did. Ultimately, if out there and your organization doesn't support you to, move the issues, increase the size of the plate, then maybe it's an indication that you should start looking to join another organization.
To stop and move on to the next section here, because time's flying. It's a great discussion, and we're getting close to our hour. We may run a little overtime, 5 minutes. So just to give everybody a heads up on that. Let's look at the third area, organizational impact, and poll number 3. On which of your organization is strategic sourcing success most dependent? Procurement, finance, IT, or other? And I know, Kate, I'm going to go to you, and you'll probably say all, right? But Kate, what do you think?
I think it's other. It's people.
Okay.
It doesn't matter where they're at.
Got it. Don, what are your thoughts?
Other. I think it's all of the other parts of the organization are severely or definitely impacted, deeply impacted.
For example, beyond the ones, because it's obviously a limited 3, but who else?
Joint operations.
Customer service, production, manufacturing,
exactly.
Sales.
Whatever business is. To be strategic, to be success in strategic sourcing, you really need to understand the business need. What is it that you're actually trying to achieve? What is like in there? Procurement, IT, their support functions. They help you get right decisions, but it's really the of whatever organization you're in. If you're in manufacturing, it's the manufacturing guys. Drill exploration in oil fields, it's the drillers, it's the well ops guys.
I will put a contrary position out there based on these slides and research. it's the method that organizations are going to transform how they source and deliver value. IT need to play a much larger role in interactions and also helping sourcing to either transactional purchases at a low level, but also incorporate artificial intelligence, web scanning, text analysis to have a broader and better view of marketplace, supply markets, and demand markets.
So what you're saying is in turn. Well, now this is an interesting point on what you just said, Christian, in terms of IT, because we're talking about in the digital age here. So you'd automatically think IT would have a role, yet the attendees, the response is zero for IT. A little bit of finance. Majority agreed with Kate and Don, and 33% said procurement. We're responsible for the success. I mean, how did that get missed, the IT part? And there's no right or wrong answer. I want to say this to everybody. You know, these polls are designed to get what your real thoughts are. But does that surprise you, that no one said IT?
No, because I think it got to a point Phil made earlier about the way companies looked at services for a while. You know, they tried to do it internally. They miserably. They outsourced it. They had some success. Their energy goes now into maintenance, and they have seen the value of these new systems: blockchain, RFID, artificial intelligence, saying and external marketing can act together in product launches and getting suppliers on board. It seems that companies, the same way that sourcing has become a key part, or supply chain management has become a key part. Rather than looking at some of these functions, finance and IS as enablers, you have to actually bring them in to what Porter called back in the 80s the value chain. These can no longer sit up top. They can be outsourced because it's talent management, and if we don't have the right talent, we're going to be lost. And if we're behind the curve on these advanced technologies, we're going to be lost.
You see, this is why I want to revisit what I talked about earlier in terms of this slide with the McKinsey study. And the fact that no one voted for IT here, and Phil, I'm going to go to you, and then to you, Kate, and then Dawn, and I know, Kate, you've got a hard talk with us in 2 minutes. You know, when you go to the companies and you talk, less than 20% of these companies have a path of digital reinvention. They're not adjusting to the digital era. May that explain the lack of response for that, Phil?
Quite possibly. And it's actually getting people to understand the difference between digital and technology enabled. And so with digital, it does need a total reinvention, because what we do is very broad as well. We're talking manufacturing, we're talking services, we're talking all sorts of different things there. But if you think of what the technology is there to do, it's all around decision making. And tech enablement was a basic technology pinning from a left to right process, whereas digital, you're drawing information from wherever and knitting it together. So many organizations will be tech enabled and have workflow and all that sort of stuff, but very few of them seem to be fully minded as to what digital really means. And I think also why people didn't respond, and the IT in there is the way that the polls are almost binary on this, which is the most important. I said operations, but technology is really important as well, and finance and procurement, etc. So maybe it's just a case of how we set those the questions up as to why we're responding in that particular way, rather than reading too much into the fact that he thinks technology is important, because it definitely is.
Okay, Dawn, anything to add to what both Phil and Christian just said?
No, I absolutely agree that if it was multiple choice and I could choose A, B, C, D, something like that, I think we would have had IT included for sure. So, no, I concur with them.
So, in essence, as we look at strategic sourcing, and going back to the previous slide, I'll just click back there for a moment. We're talking about only 2% that report supply chain as part of their forward-looking digital strategies. What do you reason that is, Dawn? And then I'll go to you, Kate. Why do you think that is? Because this will obviously have an effect on strategic sourcing, will it not?
It's not, and so just because 20% of the organizations have a digital transformation at the hub, it doesn't mean that individual departments are focusing on. And I think a lot of procurement organizations are. I think the art and AI, we're definitely seeing all of them talk to it. And I know, they're talking about the digitalization. So I think I'd say that the company overall has a digital reinvention is point. I think majority of the organizations have started to talk about it at a departmental level. It's not at a company-wide level necessarily. Somebody has to lead, and the rest will follow after they see the examples and the proof of concept. So,
okay. And I think when you think about investing in the digital era, do you have to do that yourself? Think about what we wrote about in the Procter & Gamble Jones Lang & Saul case. One of the reasons why they chose to work very strategically with a supplier partner instead of just vendors in facilities management, it was super risky for P&G to have one supplier for all of their corporate offices around 60 countries, 130 campuses. And it was because Jones Lang & Saul invested in IT. They are the extension. And who's going to invest in facility management IT? P&G or GE or one of the other companies, Microsoft or whatever? Or are they going to lean on their suppliers? This is all they do in life is facility real estate or a manufacturing supplier. So I think it's maybe short-sighted to say that a company has to do the digital transformation themselves. But I think strategically and in a more partnership role, a win-win environment with their suppliers, the suppliers are willing to make these investments. They are making these investments. We are absolutely seeing that.
So what's happening, it's starting to happen, but one of the things I found interesting, and I think it was you, Don, who mentioned that up until a few years ago, there wasn't such a thing as a CPO in organization. Are we seeing similar transformations in terms of the digital world and its impact on strategic sourcing? For example, you've got to have a chief digital officer now in the emergence. Is that going to facilitate the kind of transformation we need to go back to what I talked about in the first place? As we become more technologically advanced and those transactional functions are more automated, enabling procurement professionals to become more strategic in what they do and ultimately moving towards strategic sourcing. Are we seeing these kinds of changes that are going to have to occur for that to take place?
Yeah, we're seeing more and more CDOs, chief digital officers, emerging, and I think that is a trend very similar to the CPO. If you put that title in place, it says you acknowledge the need for the digitalization of the business, and you've got somebody typically who has the knowledge and the belief, the capability of being digital or going digital. So I think it's just a matter of time, but I think, definitely we'll see more and more of that.
Well, I just want to take a moment to thank all of you today for participating in this webinar. The time flew by very quickly, and I have to say it was an interesting and enlightening discussion. If we were to sum it all up, and I'll give you each 30 seconds to sum it all up, what is the key takeaway that our audience should take from today's webinar? And I'll start with Kate, because I know you got to run. Go to you, Don, and go to Critten and Phil.
Let's sign off.
Okay, so Don, we'll go to you.
Well, I say thank you to Zycus for allowing this thought leadership webinar to take place. We didn't talk about their technology at all. So I would say the key takeaway for me is, one, I'd love doing business with Zycus. They are phenomenal. But to keep it non-commercial, I'd say the key takeaway is that the world is changing and you need to change with it, or,
Christian, what are your thoughts?
Just keep your skills sharp and look for opportunities. If you're looking down over stuff you're going to trip over, you're never going to find new and interesting to explore. You can plan out your day to get transactional stuff down and done. And then use webinars, use educational services, look around and see what opportunities exist. That's how you're going to move forward in your career.
The last word. You get the last word.
For me, the strategic sourcing, I think using digital to actually do what Chris has been saying, using the digital ability to free up the time, automate, but at the end of the day, the value is in the relationship with the supplier. And that.
Well, Phil, Don, Christian, thank you so much for joining us today. Just a couple of things before I let everyone go. I want to remind everyone that Zycus Horizon 2018 is just around the corner, October 28th and 30th in Lansdowne Resort and Spa, Leesburg, Virginia. Use the promo code Webinar100 to save $100 off the actual conference cost. As someone who's been at the last couple, these are great events with great exciting opportunities to meet some of the people perhaps who have been on the panel and previous panels, but to share ideas with associates. So again, I encourage you to take advantage of that as well. I also want to remind you that the tweet chat, hashtag sourcing 2018 will be up and operational within the next couple hours. We'll have the poll results and expand this discussion. And on that note, as Jonathan is your host and moderator, thank you for having me, and I would wish you all a good day.